Okay, hello everybody. We'll be starting soon. I thought for a minute I wasn't going to make it. I had some issues with the generator, but it turned out to be pretty simple. There's more people checking in. Hi, Jeff and Jaya. Good to have you. Okay. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Okay, so this is the last talk in the series on the 10 Saṃyojanas, the fetters that bind us to samsara. And for the last few times, we've been dealing with the deeper fetters, the ones that are only overcome by arahantship. And today we're going to deal with the last in the list, which is Avijjā, ignorance. It has this place of honor or dishonor, as you might say, at the very end of the list, because it is really the root of everything else. The word avijjā means not knowing. Vidya is knowledge. So avijja is not knowing. So it's actually very close cognate to the English word ignorance, which comes from the Greek ignosis, not knowing. It's almost identical in derivation. Ignorance refers to the darkness of mind, and when it's asked ignorance of what, the answer is ignorance of the Four Noble Truths. Ignorance of suffering, the cause of suffering, the end of suffering, and the path leading to the end of suffering. So you could also say less precisely or less referentially, you could say that ignorance about the nature of our condition in samsara and the way out of that. In the Abhidhamma, there's an extended definition of ignorance that is from the Dhammasangini that covers 8 factors, the Four Noble Truths, and then ignorance about the past, ignorance about the future, ignorance about both past and future, and ignorance of the dependent origination. So again, this really means ignorance of our situation in samsara. Well, this references to time, past and future, is a reference to our current situation, our present situation, caught between birth and death, previous lives and future lives. We have this sort of little window of limited cognition and understanding, And outside of that is a vast sea of darkness that we don't know where we are coming from or where we are going. Avijjā also occurs as the first item in the sequence of the Paticca the dependent origination. Because of ignorance, karma formations. So what this means is that because we are ignorant, we're essentially blundering around without a full understanding and causing ripples in the fabric of reality, and we then experience later as karma resultant. It's significant that the Arahant, who is the only one who has eliminated ignorance from his mind stream, does not make any karma. The Arahant's actions are without karmic consequence because he's not acting from ignorance. So the dependent origination does not occur. In the traditional iconography of the Wheel of Life as presented in Tibet, which is a visual representation of the dependent origination, ignorance is represented by a blind man stumbling along with a stick. And this is often the imagery of darkness versus light is used to distinguish ignorance from knowledge or wisdom, understanding, panya. So ignorance being at the end of the list of the Saṃyojanas is considered the last defilement to go, and it's the root of all other defilements. The three root defilements are lobha, dosa, moha, greed, hatred, and ignorance. And of these, ignorance is the source of everything else. There are two variants or variant shades of ignorance, which are called associated with false views and associated with no views. That's the language of the Visuddhimagga, but it could be expressed as misunderstanding versus not understanding, or confusion versus ignorance per se, it's not knowing. Sometimes beings are caught in the grip of false views, and they they think they know, but they're still ignorant because they're knowing wrongly, or and in other cases there's a dullness or a stupidity that a being has no view at all, and it's just completely in the dark. Ignorance is overcome by wisdom, the development of panya, and that comes from seeing things in their own nature as they actually are. Yata bhuta nanadasana, seeing things, the knowledge and vision of things as they are. And the particular practices to cultivate that, or what we call vipassana, is a kind of disciplined introspection to observe the processes and contents of the mind directly, so that we can dispel ignorance, not knowing. We can see things as they are clearly. And not all forms of lack of knowledge could be really classed as avijja in the technical sense. If you don't know the population of France, then that's not really ignorance in the sense of avijja. That's just a lack of particular data. Um, and in fact, in the spiritual life, it's actually positive to know that you don't know. This, what I mean by this is that we need to have an opening, questioning mind, not to think we have things figured out or settled, but to have this kind of openness. Ajahn Chah often used the phrase "mai ne" from Thai, "mai ne," which is difficult to translate precisely, but it's something like you might say with a shrug of the shoulders, "Who knows?" or whatever. To take that attitude, I don't know. So in some sense, this is admitting your ignorance and being, open to rectifying it. But it's also a deep honesty. I don't know. I'd like to find out. I'm open to knowing. And this is how you develop wisdom. You have to have that openness, openness of the mind, to hold the mind like a question mark. What is truth? What is reality? Rather than try and be clever and think you figured it out. It's actually a danger in the spiritual life, is trying to be too clever, thinking you've got things figured out. This can lead to your closing doors in the mind. You think you've got this particular thing settled, so you can put it aside. You don't have to do any work in that area again. I'm finished there. But in reality, you're not finished. There's still a lot more needs to be done. Until you become an arahant, there's always areas of unknowing that you can further illuminate. And when we put ignorance at the beginning of the dependent origination, that does not mean that ignorance is the first cause of everything in the sense as the causeless cause, or the primordial beginning point. And the Visuddhimagga discusses this, so it makes it quite a clear point about this, that we're not to regard even ignorance as being without a cause. So the cycle of the dependent origination is actually best seen as a circle, as a continuous repetition, rather than as a linear progression from ignorance on. Ignorance is given the position of the head of the dependent origination, or the first element, primarily for the ease of exposition. It's a good place to start talking about it. In the same passage, the Visuddhimagga goes on to ask if ignorance has a cause, what is the cause of ignorance? And gives the answer that it is the asavas. That is it's another word that's very difficult to translate. It's been translated as cankers, inflows, outflows, biases. It's basically a list of the root defilements, and they're particular defilements that the Buddha overcame at the instant of becoming a Buddha. So they're considered like very essential components. and they have a strong overlap with this list we're discussing today, the Saṃyojana. The four asawas are the asawa of sense desire, kama asawa, the asawa of the desire for being, bhava asana, both of which occur in the Saṃyojanas. Ditti asawa, the asawa of views, which could be considered covered by the first three of the Saṃyojanas, and the asawa of ignorance, Avijjā, which we're discussing now. So, in one, the list of the asawas is like a condensed or abbreviated form of the Saṃyojanas. They are their states of mind that keep us in existence, to keep us bound to samsara. And at the base of each list is ignorance. So overcoming ignorance, arising wisdom can be seen as the purpose or the goal of the path. You can either think of the spiritual path as being the ending suffering, or achieving wisdom. And this becomes kind of, the motivating factors become like a carrot and a stick. We want to escape from suffering, but we want to achieve wisdom. And it ends up, the two are acquired simultaneously. Because of the exposition of the dependent origination, we can see that one thing we can say about that is that we suffer because we are ignorant. Because we're ignorant, we start that whole process going that ends in birth, sickness, old age, and death. And we're doing that to ourselves because we're ignorant, because we don't know what we're doing. So we're constantly creating karma, and then the whole process unfolds from there. And of course, we're not, as we said, you're not free of ignorance completely until you become an arahant. But we can always work to reduce ignorance. It certainly is a matter of degrees. It's possible to be much more ignorant or much less ignorant, or another way of saying that is more or less wise. And we should always be striving to clear up ignorance. And the ending of ignorance is another synonym for the attainment of nibbana, because having fully entered or penetrated the unconditioned, then one has a clear understanding of the conditioned by comparison. There's a very interesting talk that was given by Ajahn Mahabua near the end of his life. It was one of his last, if not the last, of his public discourses. And it's been translated into English, and you can find it on the internet. It's called Arahata Magga Arahata Pala, in which he quite openly talks about his attainment of arahantship. It created a great buzz in Thailand when it came out. It's a very interesting talk. And one of the points that he makes in that talk is about Avijjā. He said that for a long time in his practice, he was absorbed into a brilliant light. And he thought, for a long time, he mistakenly thought that was nibbana, that was the end of the journey. And this, I think many people would easily make that mistake. And it has been often the goal of mystics, to seek to be absorbed into the great light. But then he says that he came to the conclusion that this great light was actually the last manifestation of Avijjā. And this was the essence of Avijjā, was this great light. So this kind of turns the imagery that we're used to on its head. We think of Avijjā as darkness and wisdom as light. But he's saying this manifestation of light was actually the last manifestation of Avijjā. I think another way of looking at that, just turn it around and look at it from the other direction, we could say that this great light that he experienced is the first, rather than the last manifestation. We could say it's the first manifestation of becoming, of samsara. It's the first emergence into the conditioned. And when it's still very pristine and pure and simple, before it takes on all the complications of the lower or outer levels of existence. And we find that that kind of a model in the scheme of the jhanas, the jhanas of form, the jhanas of the formless, that as one progresses from sense desire experience through the jhanas and then the formless jhanas, is always a movement towards simplicity. And finally, at the stage of neither perception or non-perception, we could say that that's samsara reduced to its bare minimum. So it's interesting and significant, I think, that Ajahn Mahabua identified that great light as being the primordial manifestation of Avijjā. This also harmonizes with the model of the dependent origination, that because of ignorance, everything else unfolds. So there's first a very great simplicity and purity, and then it gets complicated and muddled by motivated by that ignorance. Beings take karmically effective action, and they get ensnared in the results of those actions. They spin a web to trap themselves. And as we stumble along through samsara, we just keep making more and more karma. We keep trapping ourselves more and more complex states of being. And the spiritual path is to try and cut through that and reverse that, and realize by the wisdom that is deeper and behind even Avijjā, to develop a true knowing, true seeing. So I'll stop there and go for questions at this time. Okay, you have a question here. Is a fully enlightened being in Theravada equivalent to a fully enlightened being in other branches of Buddhism, like Zen and Tibetan? That's a difficult question to answer. So possibly, I'll just say possibly. I know there have been some attempts to harmonize the system of the 4 stages of awakening in Theravada with the 10 Bodhisattva bhumis in Tibetan Buddhism. I'm not convinced that that works completely well. I think the realization of the unconditioned, the full awakening experienced by a Buddha or an Arahant must be the same in any tradition. But all the kind of apparatus around it, the discussions around it, the stages leading to it, and the results of it as played out in the life of the person, that does, I think, differ from school to school. Let me see. Hello, Ajahn. There's a sutta stated that the 5 hindrances is the food for ignorance. In the absence of 5 hindrances, is the absence of 5 hindrances samadhi? What is the relation between avijja, vijja, panya, and samadhi? Yes, the absence of the 5 hindrances, if it's not exactly samadhi, it definitely leads to samadhi. It encourages samadhi. Samadhi naturally arises when the 5 hindrances are absent or quiescent. Then samadhi easily and naturally occurs. What was the second part of this? So what's the relation between vijja, avijja, panya, and samadhi? Well, vijja is knowledge, knowing. And avijja is the lack of that. The a at the beginning of a word in Pali is usually the negative prefix. So we could say like un in English, un. So we have knowing and unknowing. So there's vijja and avijja. And vijja is different than panya. Panya is wisdom. And the relationship between the two is said that vijja is the soil from which panya grows. But vijja is and panya are well, they're both kinds of not knowing, but they're on a different level. Avijjā is knowing or understanding in the sort of the sense of having something clear in the mind, and to a large degree, avijjā can be gained by study and thought, and listening, reading. The accumulation of information is a form of avijjā. But panya is deeper. Panya is the knowing or understanding in the deeper sense of direct experiential understanding. The clear knowing that comes from actually seeing reality. Let's see. How much do you interpret Nagarjuna's statement? How do you interpret Nagarjuna's statement? The boundaries of samsara are the boundaries of nirvana. Is it misrepresentation of the Buddha's words, or is it compatible with the Pali Canon perspective? The boundaries of samsara are the boundaries of nirvana. I don't. Often the Nagarjuna statements are very deep, but they're cryptic. One way of interpreting that I could see that would be compatible with Theravada is that both samsara and nirvana are boundless, but in kind of different ways. So you could say that there's no boundary to either one. So then you could see a similarity, but I doubt that's what Nagarjuna was actually meaning here. The way I understand, and I don't claim to have a great understanding of Madhyamaka or Nagarjuna, but I think that he gets onto this kind of topic of, in essence, there's no difference between samsara and nirvana, which sounds very wrong at first approach from a Theravada view, but samsara is just another way of looking at it. You could say samsara is just reality, and samsara. So, Venerables, the great light. The great light is the way the bhava asava manifests in the end. Well, that is according to Ajahn Mahabua, and I think that the meaning is it's the very simplest form of samsaric existence. It manifests just as a great light. It's not yet differentiated. Like in our lower levels of being, everything is differentiated. It's complicated. But the first initial impulse of being is very simple and pristine, and then it begins to fracture. Let's see this. Okay, I gotta scroll up again to find the next question. Was Mahabua doing kasina meditation? And was what he called Avijjā the nimitta? I don't know for sure what meditation he was doing. I don't think so. I think he was doing some form of insight, but I don't think he even specifies what form he was doing. Venerable Ajahn, when the Buddha talks about human existence, he speaks of the 5 khandha, which needs to be unclung to. And in Ajita's questions, the Buddha says, Rupa ceases when consciousness ceases. So what exactly does transcend to nibbana? Yeah, that is a type of question I think the Buddha would call unanswerable, abhyakata, because it's essentially wrongly formed, in that there's an implicit assumption in the question, what transcends to nibbana? There's an assumption that something must transcend to nibbana. How does one get rid of avijjā? By the development of wisdom, which is done by directly observing reality, which is done by practicing some form of vipassana meditation, observing the actual occurrences of mind on a moment by moment basis. And then you're trying to, when you're doing vipassana, you should be trying to get always closer down to the kind of bedrock of experience. Our ordinary perception is so full of confusion and delusion because we imagine things, and we take from the actual experience, we add on layers and layers of thought and emotion and perception and so on. Whereas with Vipassana, you're trying to cut through all that and get down to the root of mind and object of mind. And when that's done repeatedly and in a proper disciplined way, then you'll begin to understand reality at that level, at that sort of atomic level of mind, and then wisdom arises out of that. Okay. Or related to it, this is a continuation of something else here. I think he, meaning Ajahn Mahabua, I suppose, that Avijjā was the brilliant center of the chitta, nimitta. Now, I'm not sure about that. Probably so. That's probably what he thought. Oh, Ajahn, is violence to protect a nation justified? And does it create bad karma? If intention is what creates karma, then one can fight without bad intention. Is there no bad karma? There's really no way to avoid bad karma performing any act of violence, even defending one's nation, even defending oneself. And it's going to be at least mixed karma involved in any act of violence. And this is a difficulty of living in samsara, in human society, that we we're often forced into these kinds of situations, and uh, there's really no easy answer. I have heard that some Thai soldiers take the position that they love their country so much that they're willing to sacrifice not only this life but their future lives by creating bad karma in defense of the nation. Mhm. That's part of the messiness of being a human being in samsara, that we get these insoluble problems that there's no good answer to. Are humans the lowest beings that can gain release from these deep underlying bondages and attain liberation? Yes, and the lower realms, it's not possible to attain liberation. The best they can do is to be reborn as a human being and then go from there. Does the Abhidhamma speak about dualism in relating to ignorance, or is it a concept in the Tibetan tradition? No, I don't think the Abhidhamma ever directly addresses dualism. I think that is something that way of looking at things and talking about dualism and transcending dualism. I think that's a later development, and we find it in Tibetan Buddhism for sure, and also in some versions of Hinduism. What kind of karma would be generated by an ascetic who keeps all at the sila and meditate most of the day, but he does not give dana? When he dies, where do you think he'd be reborn? I think he would take a good rebirth. Uh, if he's keeping all the 8 precepts and he's meditating, it's quite possible. Depending on the depth of his meditation, it's quite possible he could be reborn in the Brahma realm. Um, at the very least, I would think he would take a good human rebirth. But nothing is sure in that. You can't speak too definitively about this because nothing is really sure in talking about karma and rebirth, because any individual might lead a life like that perfectly pure but have old bad karmas from previous lifetimes. The only surety is attaining to stream entry, and then there's no possibility of becoming reborn at lower than human ever again. Uh, Hello, Damawaro. Yeah. Is the state of simultaneous nothingness and everythingness of the mind when it enters into deep samadhi quite detached from the senses what nibbana is? No, it's not really possible to say what nibbana is, and if you think you can define it with a definition like that, then it's not it. Do dependent origination question: do sankharas arise for an arahant? Yes, they'll arise due to previous karma, but he doesn't make any fresh karma. I've always wondered if arahants are just experts at reacting with upeka to sankharas, or if sankharas don't arise at all for them. Yeah, they would not experience any mental distress on account of painful sensations. If in a house there's a peta, could this peta make trouble people who live in the house? Petas have that kind of power over humans, especially humans who keep panchasila. No, petas are actually pretty harmless. They're quite ineffective. The only harm they could do you, and if you keep panchasila, the 5 precepts, then you're protected. But they can cause mental distress by getting into your mind and through the vehicle of your defilements. They can cause you some kind of madness or distress, but they can't do any harm if you're not in some way cooperating with it. Could we say that only things that come from one life to another are the only things that come from one life to another are karma, sila, and paramis? I would even just say karma and paramis. Nagarjuna question above. Could the statement mean that samsara and nirvana are mutually exclusive and there is no overlap or interaction? Where samsara ends, nirvana begins, or the other way? That's another way of interpreting it. It's possible. I wouldn't. I don't think that doesn't seem to me to be in the spirit of Nagarjuna generally. Uh, what exactly is kama? What is its source? I assume you mean kama with two M's. Kama with one M is sense desire, a long A and one M. But kama, two M's, is, or karma in Sanskrit, is action. Is volitional action. When we create a volitional action, the source is ignorance. We act out of ignorance. Then I think the best sort of model to think of it is that you're causing a disturbance in the structure of the universe. And it's like the conservation laws in physics. When if you disturb one part of a system, then another part will shift to compensate. So then in the future, you get the result of karma coming back at you. Next question. Can watching and knowing anicca and anatta moment to moment whole day help me get rid of ignorance? Yes. Yeah, that's exactly. If you can watch anicca and anatta moment by moment, then that will diminish ignorance. In fact, in the Mahasatipatthana Sutta, at the end of the sutta, it says if one can practice this for even 7 days, one will attain either to the state of an anagami or an arahant. And that's usually interpreted to mean, not missing a single moment, but being clearly seeing the characteristics in each moment for 7 days, which is extremely difficult to do even minutes. Okay, next one. Each higher realm, kama and rupa loka, clearly seems better than the previous. Yet this is less evident for the arupa realms. What is the nature of this form of avijjā? Well, it depends, first of all, what you mean by better. The experience of pleasure gets higher through the Deva realms and then into the Brahma realms until we transcend it with Upeka. And then I would say the better way to express it, rather than say better, is to say that each successive realm is simpler, more pure, more pristine, less complex. Like a lot of our suffering here at this level is due to the complexity of being at this stage of nature, of our bodies and minds are so complex. There's like so many moving parts rubbing against each other. And this is much less as you ascend through the different realms until you get to the realms of the formless, where it's extremely simple. It's so simple that we have trouble even grasping or imagining what it might be like. I think better is kind of putting the wrong sort of value judgment on it. Better to say pure, more pristine, simpler, less complex. Are asawas non-self also? Yes, yeah, everything. Well, they're empty. Everything is empty and without a self-reference. They are the primary cause for ignorance, but are they also conditioned? Yes, everything in samsara is conditioned. And that's why it's best to see the dependent origination as a kind of a circle. When being comes to the end of the dependent origination is death. But that's not the end of the experience, because then one is plunged again into ignorance. The memories of the past life are erased. One is plunged into utter ignorance and then comes out of that into a new existence. Are volitional actions of generosity and kindness also out of ignorance, as they too create pleasant karmic results? Yes, they are. it's still better to do them than not. But any karma, except if it's done by an arahant, then they're beyond ignorance. But any action we do is because of ignorance, because of a lack of full understanding. We don't really know what we're doing, but we can have degrees of ignorance and degrees of knowledge. And if you have the knowledge that you're going to make good karma by being generous and you act on it, then yeah, you'll get good karmic result, but not necessarily escape from samsara. Okay, I think I'll wrap this up, and next week we'll start on something else, some other different topic. This concludes the series on the Saṃyojanas. So thank you very much, and we'll see you again next week.